What's up, family? My name is Erin McCluskey, and I'm an executive coach. I work with executives who are interested in redefining success in their professional and personal lives. And you are tuning in to Mini Bytes Session 52. And tonight's topic is boundaries with an open heart. So I have, for the last several weeks, been doing a little bit more of a deep dive into boundary setting, understanding what boundaries really mean to me, and really just taking a look at how boundaries have played a role in my life up until this point. And so I've come across some really interesting research around boundaries. But before I get into that, I want to start with sort of putting the question out there. What is a boundary? What is a boundary? And I invite you to take a moment now and reflect on that question. What that means to you, and I will share. One definition of a boundary is very simple. What is mine and what is not. And the vision that comes up, or the image that surfaces, is that of a fence, right? So you have a fence around your house, or there's a fence around a property. And that fence keeps in what is meant to be inside of the fence, and it keeps out what is not meant to come inside of the fence. So anything that's not meant to be on my property of my house that has the fence around it stays outside of the fence because of the fence. If the fence wasn't there, then all sorts of animals and things and people would be coming onto my property, into my area that I live, into my environment. And so that's really what boundaries are. It's a fence. A boundary is a fence around me, around you, that makes it very clear what is mine and what is not. And so this is really, I believe I've actually done a mini bite session on a similar topic way back, maybe 20 or so sessions ago. But what I want to focus on today is, as I continue to set boundaries for myself in my life in this new chapter that I'm entering, because I haven't arrived in the area of boundary setting. I'm not sure that it's possible to. I think it's really more of a progress, because as I encounter new situations and new circumstances and new people, it's an opportunity for me to do sort of, that pulse check and check in on where am I at today with my boundary setting, and maybe tweak or modify boundaries as needed. So as I've been doing this the last several weeks, I've been listening to books and podcasts and reading and really learning a lot about boundaries and boundary setting. But in that process, I didn't notice this until the last few weeks, but I started to allow a little bit more of a fortress to build around my heart. I started to close the heart a little bit in my process of learning to set more boundaries. So how did that show up in my life? Well, it showed up in very subtle ways initially. Perhaps I chose not to interact or pick up the phone when somebody called, or make that call that I thought of making, just really simple things like that. And then eventually, over the last couple of weeks, it really started to unfold, and I was finding it difficult to actually receive. I was finding it difficult to actually receive compliments and receive gifts from other people, which is always a sign that I'm kind of masking or protecting the heart in a way that's sort of unnecessary. And the interesting thing about that is that when we talk about boundaries and boundary setting, there's a lot of different ways to sort of violate boundaries. And there's two examples described in a book I'm reading called Boundaries. And it talks about compliance and avoidance. And actually, really what it talks about is how a lot of us, we are not taught to prioritize boundary setting as children. And as we grow up, we tend to become very compliant or very avoiding. And so we tend to set boundaries where we're not really supposed to set boundaries, or we're not really meant to set boundaries, or we tend to actually set boundaries where we're not meant to, or not set boundaries where we're meant to, right? So we end up sort of saying yes to the things we're not really supposed to say yes to, and we end up saying no to the things that we're actually kind of supposed to, or it would be good for us to say yes to. So you've got the compliant person that's saying yes to everything. You've got the avoidance personality, the individual that ends up sort of running away. So I want to share that. And coming back to setting boundaries with an open heart, it's really important as I continue my process of setting more boundaries in my life, to keep in mind that an open and light heart is really important, because I'm not setting these boundaries because I desire solitude, or I desire to isolate, because I know if I'm being called toward isolation, that's actually not my natural desire. There's usually something happening in my life that needs to be addressed if I'm wanting to isolate. So boundaries for me are actually so that I can show up and be more present, not only for me, but for you. Yes, my setting boundaries allows me to be more present for you. And so if my heart is starting to feel more closed up as I'm setting boundaries, that's an indication that I need to check in and see what I'm doing, because something's off. And I want to wrap up with this that kind of helps confirm the fact that the more I set boundaries for me, the more I can be present for you in my work, in my personal life, in my professional life. There was a study done, and Brene Brown was a part of this study. If you don't know who Brene Brown is, look her up. She's got some really great content. And she talks about what was the one factor, the one set of criteria that the most compassionate people had in common. So they did this study. She's a researcher. They did this study, and they looked at all these people that were considered to be the most compassionate people based on a set of criteria, and they identified a pattern amongst those people. Well, the pattern, the one factor that all of the most compassionate people had in common, they had boundaries of steel. So on that note, thank you very much. Love you all. Until the next time.